Okay. I think it says so. Okay, there we go. All right. With me, I'm Jeff, Boy for Jesus channel. I have with me Kenneth Samples of Reasons to Believe. He's their resident theologian and philosopher, I believe. I have him on today to talk about book he co-authored, which is, I'm getting a little static on your end. I didn't know if that was me or you.
Yeah, I hear it too.
Okay. Oh, there it goes. Maybe there it's gone. Anyway, we're here to discuss a book he co-authored. Maybe what is it, 2002 or 2004?
2000. Yeah.
Yeah, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, about the UFO phenomenon. And maybe the biggest difference between then and now, and we'll get to that, is I think people have pretty come around to taking this phenomenon more seriously, I would say. So let's just get into this. Since you first published your book, we've had things like the recent Department of Defense videos, and they are causing this topic to be taken more seriously. Um, could you please explain why your book was written and what the UFO phenomenon is and what you were trying to address in your book?
Yeah. One thing that I think I appreciate about our book is we had three authors coming at the topic from very different points of view. So Hugh Ross, for example, is an astronomer. So he could provide kind of a perspective on other planets, and he's worked at Caltech, so he's looked through these telescopes, and he could provide a more scientific basis. Mark Clark is a security expert, and so he could write a little bit with a real understanding about the government and what the government says about secret phenomena. And my background, I before working at Reasons to Believe, I worked with Walter Martin, and so I was interested in a religious perspective, what we might call UFO cults. So I think that's a strength of our book. Now, why did we come to write it? Well, I think that we always got lots of questions about it. People are interested in the subject. They want to know, is it possible that life could exist on other planets? And then I think I would say over the last 50 or 60 years, there has been a lot of discussion about UFOs, about their alleged connection to the government. And I, of course, was interested in that because I'm interested in conspiracy theories. I'm interested in why people come to believe them. Is there a way of falsifying them or verifying them? So we thought that a book like this could serve a real apologetic purpose. And I have to say, probably of all the books that I've either written or co-written, this might have received the most attention. In terms of kind of the UFO phenomenon, I mean, there are people, Jeff, that claim to have seen unusual things in the sky, even in the ancient world. But I think that what I would call kind of the UFO craze, if you will, starts to happen just prior to aviation. So going back early or the latter part of the 19th century, but really when it kind of comes into its own is at the time of the end of World War II. There were Allied pilots and Axis pilots who claimed to see unusual things in the sky. They called them the Foo Fighters. Then after World War II, 1947, a commercial pilot, Kenneth Arnold, who was a very reliable type of person, not prone to exaggeration, said that he saw multiple crafts when he was flying over Mount Rainier in Washington. And that kind of led to an interest in UFOs by the public. It even started in the military. People wanted to know, and Project Blue Book, Project Grudge, various military interests. They wanted to know, is this Soviet aircraft? Is this advanced enemy aircraft? What's happening? And then out of that, of course, became at one point a very religious phenomenon. You had the contactees. These were people as early as the 40s and the 50s claiming to have some kind of contact with an extraterrestrial religious source. And then later, I think in the 90s and all the way up to our time, you have the abductees, people who actually claim to have been abducted. So it has kind of been a growing, and then you mentioned, rightfully so, Jeff, that of recent, the American military has returned to this subject because there have been naval aviators, for example, who have seen unusual phenomena in the sky, and some of them have said that if these were literal metallic crafts, the kind of maneuvers they were performing would kill human beings because of the laws of physics. So they have again raised the question, could this be some Russian or Chinese aircraft, or are we encountering some kind of extraterrestrial source? And Jeff, just a couple weeks ago, there was I saw an interview with a professor at Harvard who is a Harvard astronomer, and he has written a book about this. They found something, or they detected something in space, and he's raised the question about whether this could actually have been some kind of sail, like a
Right. Yeah, we covered that on our channel. He thinks it looks like a solar sail, right?
So, these issues still remain. Most scientists, I think that it was merely a natural phenomenon, but again, I think it shows that people are still interested, and I think our book has actually held up pretty well, although it could probably be updated.
Could you explain the difference in your book you make between the UFO phenomenon and what you would call a residual UFO? And then maybe further on in the interview, if we mention UFOs, we're going to be referring to residual UFOs. So,
Yeah.
if you could just clarify the distinction you guys made.
Yeah, the way I like to come at it, Jeff, is I think that there are probably three broad theories of explanation with regard to UFOs. Obviously, the first one is what I would call the misidentified hypothesis or thesis. And that's the idea that the vast majority of UFO sightings, 90, maybe 99, 95%, some people think 99%, that they can be explained naturally. They're either natural phenomena, planets, the moon, or natural things that happen in space, or they're man-made phenomena. Maybe they're aircraft. I live near a Air Force base, and I see these incredible planes flying in various weather. They can look kind of extraordinary at times. So that would be the misidentified hypothesis. Now, some people, of course, would say, well, if 99% of them can be explained naturally, then why not 100%? But that then raises, what about the phenomena that are not easily explained in terms of natural phenomena? These would be sightings where crafts perform actions that would literally be impossible if they were metallic crafts. And sometimes these encounters seem to engage in kind of a spiritual kind of context. And of course, the second then hypothesis would be, could these be extraterrestrial hypothesis? Could these actually be beings from other parts of the universe, and that's a difficult process to come to with an emphasis upon reason and rationality, because these the distances in space are so great, and it seems like almost every UFO is a different shape or a different color. So why would how would they finance all of these things? And imagine the kids on the ship saying, "Are we there yet?" I mean, it would take so long to get there. Well, this has led to our idea that there are difficulties purely explaining it as misidentified phenomena. There are real difficulties explaining it as an extraterrestrial phenomena. So maybe the residual, the small percentage of cases that are not easily explained naturally, maybe there are residual UFOs, and therefore we develop what others have called the interdimensional hypothesis. Maybe these
Right.
are real beings, but they're from another dimension of reality.
Now it seems you can't. I don't want to go over every part of this in the book, but you make a good anti-evolutionary case, and then you also the book goes over, and this is probably Hugh Ross's sections, if
Yeah.
memory serving, is that just the distances involved would be tremendous. And I just prepping for this. I recently watched on Amazon Prime the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, um, uh, which we can go into later. But I also read some of the books you footnote. I read John Keel's Operation Trojan Horse this past January, and yeah, they come to the interdimensional, uh, loosely interdimensional hypothesis as well. Would you like to go over kind of so saying so there's good reasons why we wouldn't view it as extraterrestrial, which just to summarize is the chance of life popping up is astronomical, to use an ironic term. But for even if there was advanced intelligent life, for them to make it to Earth would just not be possible with known physics. And then, but there's. Would you like to go over the positive evidence for the interdimensional? What you think is the basis for this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I would say I wouldn't move quickly from the misidentified hypothesis. That is, I think that I think one should be deliberate and careful about moving to what I would consider the more complex explanations. As you mentioned, the extraterrestrial issue is difficult. It's interesting that Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic philosopher of the 13th century, speculated about whether God could have created life in outer space. He has interesting things to say about it. Of course, he raises the Christological question, or the question of the atonement, as to whether how could a Christian God relate to beings in outer space. But it does show you, I think, that Christian thinkers have been thinking about worldview ideas for many centuries. Now, the misidentified would again be, well, if 99% could be explained naturally, then maybe all of them can. But what opens the door to a more complex explanation is that you do have you have observers who claim to have seen or observed or been able to track in one way or another uh, things that don't comport well with a natural explanation. That even the recent reports from the naval aviators was that these crafts seem real. Uh, and yet they're able to do things within the sky that would be impossible if the laws of physics were to apply. That the pilots would be killed. This, I will tell you, was impressive to Hugh Ross as an astronomer. I think that's what began his kind of thinking about this. That as an astronomer, he realizes that certain things are unusual in the sky, but things can't happen according to the laws of physics. So this raises then the question: if we can reasonably move beyond the misidentified phenomena, and if the extraterrestrial view is so complex and so difficult to ultimately overcome, I mean, Carl Sagan, a lot of people 25, 30 years ago were saying, if life began purely by natural processes, we should see life in other places, but we don't. And in science, there is now even the movement that maybe Earth and Earth's system may be rare or unique. Life is maybe very rare in the universe. Maybe there's microbial life, but certainly very unlikely that there is conscious human life. So then this does raise the question of, could this be a spiritual reality? They seem to operate when they're observed in the natural world, they seem to operate in ways that physical beings could not. Moreover, you then get into kind of the social science, you get into the religious, where oftentimes people who see these kinds of things or claim to see these kinds of things have some kind of spiritual connection. And that's, of course, where I came into the book, looking at UFO cults and UFO religion. I think it is fair to say, and this isn't my own conclusion, people like Jacques Vallée and others who specialize in the field would say that there seems to be a kind of spiritual connection, what many Christians might even identify as an occult connection, that these seem to have a connection to people who are open to the idea of spiritualism, the idea of that there is a reality beyond the physical world, and it is not your traditional Jewish or Christian orientation. Again, as a author of this book, I think you want to be very careful and very deliberate in moving in this direction, simply from the standpoint that it is a complex phenomenon. But also, I don't want to miss any of the logical steps, and I think that there is a lot said about UFOs that's not terribly credible. And so if you're going to move beyond the misidentified hypothesis, and if the extraterrestrial hypothesis is highly unlikely, I think you have to deal with the interdimensional, but I think you also have to deal with all of the weird, strange, unusual things that are connected with that phenomenon. But in the end, we draw the conclusion that maybe there is only 1% or less than 1% or about 1 to 5% that can't be explained, but they seem to be consistent with the possibility of a spiritual reality and potentially a malevolent reality.
I'm glad you bring that up. In your book, you do a good job kind of summarizing that. And again, I went and read one of the books you put, the John Keel book I mentioned earlier. He went into a lot of detail going back in history, and one of the things you summarize is that the UFO experiences kind of change over time. The thing that kind of got me with both your book and with Keel's was that in the late 1800s, people are seeing dirigibles, and they're making contact with people who are scientific tinkerers almost,
Yeah.
And the UFO, but it's not a flying saucer they're seeing. It's something relatable, but within their reach, but not in the technology they have.
Yeah.
So it shows an intelligence behind it. And he was also mentioning some of the UFO stuff they have was the UFOs respond intelligibly. So there's so that you know that there's intelligence to that. So to me, the the key thing that kind of brings your hypothesis as the most likely one was seeing the changes over time, the stories through history, which I know the people who favored the extraterrestrial hypothesis didn't seem to be a huge fan. It kind of sounds silly when you start talking about um, you know dirigibles or zeppelins or something like that in the late 1800s. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk to that and talk to if we go for malevolent, and that was Keel's conclusion too, was that it was essentially, I don't know if he used the word demons, but malevolent or trickster
Yeah.
spiritual entities, and it's just kind of what the do we know what their mindset is, or what they're trying to accomplish, and that sort of thing. If you could speak to all that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I found interesting, Jeff, was that we we were not the only authors who had drawn the conclusion that there's something suspicious about this, and that this small percentage that can't be explained naturally, that they operated seemingly above and beyond uh, the natural laws of physics. But also with people like Keel and Jacques Vallée, there was the idea and consideration on their part that, wow, this seems to be a spiritual, a possible seemingly spiritual reality, and it could potentially be a dangerous reality. Um, I think what's interesting as you move through this phenomenon, I think you're right that, in the 19th century, they seem to be, uh, what people are seeing seems to be consistent with that period. You're seeing, Zeppelins, you're seeing, this is right before aviation really takes off. Um, and then later, uh, by World War II, you have a more complex phenomenon. And then as you move further, if I could plug in kind of the religious phenomenon, I mean, there are people who claim to, uh, have close encounters. And of course, by the 1990s, you have people actually writing books describing themselves being abducted, being undergoing physical exams by these extraterrestrial beings. And you also have people who have a fascination with this, and it often doesn't come out well. That is, there are psychologists and psychiatrists that have written and said, tinkering and involving yourself with UFO religion can be very destructive emotionally, mentally, and physically. Um, and of course, we're asking the question from the standpoint of the Christian worldview: how do we explain all of this? What are we to do with this? And why is there seemingly this kind of deception that stands behind it all? I, of course, like C.S. Lewis's statement uh, that that demons applaud two things equally: those who ignore their existence, and those who become fascinated with their existence. My tradition is probably to ignore them and to exalt the sovereignty of God,
Yeah,
because
same here. Yeah.
if God were to remove his providential hand, then the devil and all of his minions would tumble into non-existence. And yet, when you study Christian theology, I think clearly there is a demonic feature in deception, and drawing people maybe away from traditional ideas of what's good and true and beautiful, and drawing them to some kind of alternative spiritual kind of issue. Um, and so, while I was a little bit cautious about trying to move too quickly in the direction of a residual UFOs that could be spiritual and could be malevolent, I was encouraged by the fact that Vallée and Keel and others who I don't think share my Christian worldview.
No, you're correct. Keel started his UFO investigation as an atheist or an agnostic, and he didn't explicitly say what he was afterwards, but it
Yeah.
wasn't that, but it didn't seem Christian, and I don't think Vallée is a Christian either. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they came to similar conclusions as you did. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's that was helpful to me, that people outside of our own studies, because Reasons to Believe, of course, is a Christian apologetics organization, a science faith emphasis, and it was interesting to see people who had spent a lot of time, had really sound educational backgrounds, who drew the conclusion that maybe there's more to this than purely crackpot people who have misidentified things.
Now, if you could explain the difference between the contactee and the abductee encounters, but more specifically from those two different groups, um, how that feeds into your hypothesis, or what we can learn from what they from the information they give us.
Yeah, I would say that starting with the contactee movement, that really kind of uh, begins in the 1950s largely, although, again, there are sources earlier than that, but a lot of that seems more science fiction. But with the 50s, you have people who view UFOs as a reality, but they see them as a spiritual reality, and that there are extraterrestrial beings that have contacted human beings, and that they have a message to deliver. And this message is of a prophetic nature. It is a critical religious message to the world. Um, and some of these contactee people see themselves as kind of they are playing kind of a prophetic role, that they've been given messages. Sometimes even these messages have been transcribed, have become books. The Urantia book, for example, is a very good example of that. So in the contactee movement, it seems very religious. It seems that there is this intelligence beyond that has moral and spiritual truths that should be communicated to human beings. I would say, however, that it's still very much kind of hard to believe. It seems more science fiction. But as you move into the 80s and the 90s, you move to a different step, and the abductee is very different than the contactee. The contactee is usually very malevolent. These are creatures that are looking after humanity. They want to help us solve some of our problems. We have existential problems, and they want to help solve them. In the abductee, it turns, I think, more in a darker direction. There are people who claim not only to see unusual things in the sky, not only to see beings, but they're abducted. They're taken to the ship. They are inspected. Sometimes they are abused and harmed. Some people have claimed that people have been killed. And this is again where some of the people who have written in the field from the standpoint of the social sciences, the mental health areas, have said that people who engage or people who encounter the abductee, they suffer. They suffer physically. They suffer mentally. And of course, some of these encounters have been made into movies. People have done interviews where they have said that these are real beings and they're malevolent beings and they mean people harm. And so again, you have a religious side. The contactee is occult religion. If you read any of these books, whether it's Heaven's Gate in San Diego, this group that later committed suicide believing there was a UFO behind the Hale-Bopp comet, you have a religious context, and the contactee is more a message. The abductee, I think, is much darker. It is more of uh, a potential threat to humanity. And again, what I found fascinating, and I think it does contribute toward our idea that it could be not only a spiritual reality but a demonic reality, is how all of these religions, all of these UFO religions, ultimately end up in something like the occult.
Yeah,
And
and they seem to. Sorry for cutting you off, but it seems to have like a pre-UFO era predecessors back in history, right?
that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just started one of the Vallée books, The Passport to Magnolia or something, and I think he mentions that's going to be his hypothesis. Um, and yeah, so with the abductee stuff, that definitely kind of reminds me of that. The contact, yeah, as I was mentioning the contactee stuff, and when you were saying about the UFO cults, the Stephen Greer movie that I just watched, it became like a how-to manual on occultic contact of extraterrestrials, scare quotes, extraterrestrials, and I couldn't watch it all the way through. I had to stop and start it. It where it's just like they were talking about Kundalini awakenings. They mentioned that once, and basically meditation and chanting and to contact extraterrestrials, and they had a lot of video which looked legitimate to me of actual UFO where they start doing essentially occultic contacts of what they said were aliens, and they start seeing UFOs, they start seeing stuff, and uh, from my Christian perspective, that just seems like what the what these entities want is to you start to contact, you know, that from a Christian perspective, that's no good. Right? You're starting to contact malevolent entities and get them into your life. One thing I should mention before I forget it is when you were mentioning with the contactees, I remember Keel mentioning that uh, there would be like true prophecies that would come true, say within the short to medium term. But then there's this consistent pattern he saw where there would be this horrible thing happening in 3 years with a given date. So you would have all these short-term prophecies. So these people would just freak out about it, like this horrible thing's happening in 3 years. But so all the near-term prophecies occur accurately, but the big one, further out, never happened.
Yeah.
So that's why he was saying, I'm not sure. It's hard to discern what these entities, and I'll call them demons, but these entities what they were trying to accomplish by that. But where it seems like you have things in the short. So if I told you like the stock market's going to go down X amount percent tomorrow, and it does, and then I give you something 3 weeks ago and it happens, you get my trust, and then this big thing, and then I said, there's going to be a nuclear war in 3 years, and that never happens.
Yeah.
That's not what Keel relates, but something that's my analogy. So I
Well,
don't know. Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that not just Christian people who are interested in UFOs, but again, these other individuals that have studied the field immediately recognize, it's very unusual. There's a lot. Some people call it the high strangeness. There's deception, and again, I am, as a Christian, I'm careful uh, before I draw too much of. Maybe it's all the logic I've studied and taught over the years, but I try to be deliberate. But what's interesting to me is I think that you have a basically religious phenomenon, but it is only in one direction. It is never, it never points to theism or some other direction in terms of religious ideas. The worldview moves to spirituality,
Very new agey, right?
new agey type of way of thinking. And I think from a biblical point of view, um, I think it is credible to say that the sign of the demonic is a sign of deception, drawing people away from God, getting them entangled in things that can be hurtful to them, not only mentally and physically, but potentially spiritually. And um, I would even say this, and again, I come from a tradition, and I think my own individual approach to this is largely to ignore the potentially demonic realm. But I have to say, Jeff, I was very glad when this project was over because I'm not one given to a lot of spiritual experiences that are extraordinary, but I experienced a lot of oppression when I was working on this manuscript, and because I had to read things that I wasn't terribly interested from a standpoint of my own spiritual life, but I felt like I had to try to figure out what's going on out there and what are these sources and what's really happening. But I remember very, very, um, I just remember having some experiences that I'd never had before, and I felt oppressed by it. And so, there are people who are very gung ho to 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 get their hands on anything and everything that has to do with UFOs. But I always try to be very cautious toward people, saying, "Look, you may get more than you bargained for."
Well, I mean, the reason why I'm interested in this is because I think it's going to, I don't want to say the next big, but one of the next, it's going to get bigger and bigger. So I was aware of your book, maybe, um, and the contents of the book in the mid-aughts, or whatever we're calling that decade. But I want to get more familiar. I've been getting more familiar with it more so I could respond to it, but I don't want to go hunting
Right.
for experiences. And Keel mentions some stuff too that he experienced while he was investigating this phenomenon. Do you want to mention uh, like a lot of the authors, though, even Keel or whatever, would attribute, say, any angelic experience to whatever was as the same thing behind UFOs. And I know the Ezekiel passage comes up. Do you want to explain why those we should do or should not do that, or where the non-Christian sources say, oh, okay, you see an angel, in the Bible, that's a UFO.
Yeah, well, I think for a long time, but maybe especially over the last 50 or 60 years, it seems like the UFO phenomenon, um, it kind of started out like it was a search for beings in outer space, but at some point it overlapped and then became much more a religious and spiritual phenomenon. And just as people in other areas seem to observe religious entities, maybe like an angel, of course, from a biblical point of view, from the standpoint of Christian orthodoxy and taking the Bible seriously and believing in the truths of historic Christianity, not all religious experience is authentically biblical or Christian, and it seems and we've touched upon this, but it strikes me as very interesting that the UFO phenomenon, if you want to call it that, it has evolved, it's changed, it's taken different orientations, and again, during World War II, it was largely something the Air Force was going to look into. By the 80s and 90s, it was much more something that people who were interested in philosophy and spirituality were interested in, and so it has taken that kind of orientation. I think the thing, though, that's characterized it throughout the history of studying this phenomenon is that it's always just outside your reach, and it is always involved in some kind of deception, and it seems that people who go looking for it suffer. They suffer it in terms of their mental health, and if some reports are to be believed, they're even physically harmed. So it's an unusual phenomenon, and I think you're right, Jeff. I think with this new group of sightings, there is a whole group of people who now are recognizing that maybe we don't have all the answers about UFOs, and there are people even today suggesting that the government should open up new investigation. And of course, as Mark Clark says in his couple chapters in our book, the government is always interested in potential threats. And if these beings can perform things in the sky that violate the laws of physics, then we want to know what they are and who they are. So I think we'll likely see a new emergence of kind of UFO religion, UFO spirituality, and that's something I think Christian apologists, Christian theologians should be interested in. Because it kind of fits with what we like. We like science fiction. We like the idea of the exploration of space, and if you can tie religion into that, it's a package that I think many people would be interested in, exploring. Unfortunately.
And specifically with Ezekiel and other angelic appearances, how would you address them some people trying to conflate that with the UFO phenomenon?
I don't see any real connection between the two. Of course, there have been people, throughout church history who have tried to take things in the Bible and kind of give them some kind of twist. I don't think Ezekiel is talking about UFOs. I don't think the Bible can reliably be interpreted according to these kinds of features. I think again, it's important to go back to the text and look at the context and look at the grammar and to interpret the Bible, in a literary way. And I think what I see in all of these UFO cults, Heaven's Gate, Ethereus Society, Urantia, it's always kind of this weird, unusual tapping into parts of the Bible that I think are taken, deeply out of context.
Thanks for that. We have a few more. I have a few more questions for you, but the second to last one would be anything about you. Have you guys investigated or have any position on the claims about reverse engineering technology from crashes or something like that, or if you're familiar with those type of claims?
Hugh Ross takes a very strong position that there's never really been any kind of physical evidence, and he's very critical of the claims that somehow the government has encountered them and retrieved the crashed these saucers or whatever they are, spacecrafts, and the idea that you would take their secrets and then somehow utilize them. Hugh takes a very strong position that none of that is credible. And I think what led Hugh down the direction of, again, the residual UFO, or what he personally would call the demonic, is that all of this phenomena really is spiritual. From the standpoint of, Roswell, Area 51, many of the areas of controversy, I think there is, again, a lot of misinformation that comes out of that. And so I don't think we would take credible the position that there is a technology that has been discovered from this phenomenon. I guess that's all I would have to say from where we come at it from our book.
Right. I'm not a priori against a spiritual entity leaving a physical effect, but it seems to me that if you are an extraterrestrial and you're going to travel 1 billion light years, crashing in New Mexico is, like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but if you're able to survive solar storms and black holes and quasars and all stuff, and then what tripped you up in New Mexico?
When you think about that extraterrestrial hypothesis, I mean, not just the distances and the technology it would take and the investment, I mean, but then the fact that so many of these UFOs look so different. I mean, they don't seem to have any kind of uniform nature to them. But there are these economic questions and philosophical questions about extraterrestrial life. And so, if you can move away from the misidentified phenomenon, which, as I've mentioned, I think you should do deliberately and carefully. But if the extraterrestrial hypothesis isn't one that is reasonable, then I think that interdimensional idea becomes, and it does have explanatory power. And from a Christian point of view, it seems to fit with the idea that there is a spiritual reality and its goal is deception. We have had people. I remember there was one skeptic, a fairly well-known skeptic, but he wrote a review of our book and he said this is the most intelligent exploration of a crazy subject you could possibly find. But Jeff, I would say from the standpoint of kind of worldview and Christian apologetic ideas, the naturalists, I think, the evolutionists, the people who propose that physical reality or the material world is the sole reality, I think they have to look at some of these kinds of issues and probe them a little bit. And I think we have a better explanation in the end than the naturalist, the atheist.
Okay, so last question. I mean, if there's anything that you want to mention that we haven't mentioned, but my last question is, it's been a while, maybe almost 2 decades since the book came out. If you did update it, what would you want to put in the book that isn't in there already?
That's a good question. I actually have gone to Hugh and said, this remains something that people are interested in. I mean, if you go on Amazon, uh, there are a lot of people that have written reviews of our book or have commented about it. And I think it's one of our more popular books. It's probably, it's sold well, although Nav Press as a publisher has, changed its orientation. Um, I I have suggested to Hugh that it would be, I think, beneficial for us to consider an update. There would be a number of things that we'd have to kind of update a lot of the statistics and things of that nature. But given that the American military is at least interested in this, I think it would be something we would consider. I'm not sure there would be any real changes, maybe some subtle changes, maybe again encouraging people to be discerning and reflective about these kinds of things. But um, it would be interesting to see if anything comes out of the reports from the military. Um, though I would say at this point it's probably not likely that we'll revise the book. We still have a lot of the physical copies of them, and we'd like to see those sell before we bring out another edition. But
Well, any new thoughts or information, or do you think I think you covered it very well. I was just wondering. I guess there hasn't been really anything super new besides there's more video and more people who will
yeah,
take. You might need to spend less time trying to convince people this is a real phenomenon. I guess.
yeah, I think to some extent there probably is some data that would be again supportive of this interdimensional hypothesis, and so who knows what we might decide. But I think one of the things that I like about the book, and I don't know that I thought a lot about this when we were writing it, but I like the fact that you have three very different authors coming from very different points of view and kind of giving their insight. Again, Hugh is an astronomer, Mark Clark, a security expert, and it's natural for me to approach a subject from the point of view of cults and isms. So I think I think the book has done well, and I would be open to the idea of revising it. I'm not sure, though, given our busy lives, that would come.
The only suggestion I would make, maybe not to you, but to a reader, is maybe the way I just kind of stumbled on it. I read your book first. You summarize a lot of the data, and you do mention footnotes. And as I said, I read you and then Keel, one after the other. And when I read Keel, I was like, you were not kidding in your summaries, because you kind of summarize the anecdotes, but Keel kind of, and it might be a little dry for some people, but when he goes over historical anecdotes, and he does that before drawing a conclusion. Having read your book first, I was like, whoa, this is like, when you look at the raw data that fed into your conclusion. Like, I remember you talking about Foo Fighters or dirigible stuff and all, but when you start reading the stuff, it's just weird. You
It
are
is.
right when it's weird, but it's and it's wacky.
Yeah.
And I guess the final thing, keep your eyes on, for the Christians out there, keep your eyes on Christ, right? You don't want to yeah. Whatever their game plan is, whatever the entities, whatever they're trying to do, whether it's straight up occultic stuff like in the fifth kind encounters or something else. So, well, unless you had anything else, I think that was.
Yeah, I would just say that what I think is interesting, Jeff, is that it is weird, it's strange, but there's a reality to it, even though you can't seem to get your hands around it, your mind around it. But there is a reality there, and that reality is, I think, potentially discerning and harmful to people. And so I think from a theological point of view, discernment is very, very important, and seemingly in our culture, in our world, in our country, we seemingly have less and less of it. So thank you for being interested in the subject, and thank you for reading our book, and thank you for having me on your program.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You have a new book coming out, I've been told. So
Yeah.
I'm getting a copy of that, and I'm looking forward to that. And maybe we can have you on in the future to talk about something less weird.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that.
All right. All right. I'm going to stop the recording now. Let's see. Stop.